Tying with the budget, certainly a big issue all over the economy and jobs. What I know that if elected, you'll be one person, but what would you advocate for to bring jobs to the district, the central New York region, and in the broader scheme of things, upstate New York?
The funny thing with this is this is the easiest question in the world, and yet we don't seem to do those simple, common sense things that are going to drive this economy forward. It's quite simple. You lower the tax burden on corporations and also on individuals, because there's a lot of small business owners that are paying their income tax. They're paying the profit that they make or the salary they make from their business as personal income tax. So we have to lower the corporate and personal income tax rates. We also have to limit the amount of regulations that we place on these businesses. The way I look at it is there's this enormous temptation by the state government to try to control the economy, to use state grants, which is essentially our common tax money, and different types of rules and regulations and fancy programs with fancy titles to try to act like politicians create jobs. We know that that's not the case. Politicians don't create jobs. Businesses create jobs. And I feel like I see more and more a state that doesn't believe the private sector creates jobs, and that we need the public sector to continuously intervene, to pick winners and losers, to dictate the conditions, to treat business owners like people who don't have the best interests of the community in mind and need to be regulated and have behavior dictated to. I guess I come more from the opposite, having been out in this community, met so many wonderful people, lots of business owners. I have yet to meet a guy or a gal who owns a business that doesn't strike me as a really wonderful citizen of our state who has the best interests of the community in mind. These are productive people with vision. Get out of their way. Stop tying their hands. Let them fulfill that vision, because we'll have much greater results in terms of jobs, in terms of tax revenue, in terms of population coming into this state instead of out of this state, if we put more trust in our citizens, and particularly in our creative class, our business owners and people who are trying to increase the productive capability of what this state puts out.
As a follow-up, there's been much talk about a property tax cap. Would you support a property tax cap?
I absolutely would support a property tax cap. I think that what we see happen is, as we know very well, all these mandates that are passed down from the federal and state level, and they come into our communities, it causes local governments to have to raise our property taxes in order to pay for these mandates. I know that some people believe that by capping property taxes at the local level, that we handcuff local officials and their ability to have flexibility with tax revenue. But at the same time, if we don't put a stop to this at some level, we're never going to force action in all these areas. So I believe that we have to not just cap property taxes, but we have to cap state spending. And we need to do both. We can't do one or the other. We really need to pass a constitutional amendment to cap state spending, and at the same time, we need to follow the recommendation of the Swazi Commission. The program bill came to the Senate floor. They recommended a property tax cap. I think we need to do both, because what that's going to do is it's going to cap the amount of money the government can spend from year to year. We've already been shown very clearly that we can't trust our legislature and our governor working in tandem to hold the line on spending. At the same time, we put a limit on what they can take out of our pockets to pay for things. Now we actually force what's necessary, which is mandate relief. We force action in a number of areas, whether it's the state pension system, whether it's Medicaid reform, whether it's efficiencies in the education system, whether it's the cost of regulations. We force action in all those areas, and we're not just cherry picking one or the other one at a time, which, as we know, there's only so much political capital to go around. So why not expend it on a couple of big moves that are then going to have a domino effect and cause action in a number of other areas?
One of the big issues, there's a lot of big issues at state level races, and another one of them being reform.
Mm-hmm.
Not only just general reform, changing the way we do business, but specific reforms too, such as rules reform and the legislature and so on. You were named a hero of reform by New York Uprising. So give me some specific examples aside from the obvious and the New York Uprising pledge. Give me some specific examples of reforms you would push for just in the New York State Senate.
Well, there's been two big ones that I've actually made a commitment to that I've gone beyond just talking about, but I've actually said, look, I'm going to put this out there publicly, let the newspapers write about it, and make it clear that I expect to be held accountable. I've pledged that I will personally term limit myself if elected. I believe term limits are one of the single greatest, if not the single greatest reform that we can enact at the state level. It's good enough for the President of the United States to be term limited at 8 years. I don't see why it's not good enough for every other official at every level. I know arguments are made against it. I've heard them. I think some of them have some merit. But ultimately, I think that if we want a more focused legislature that's more results-oriented than self-preservation oriented, we need to limit the amount of time they have to achieve a legacy and to achieve some results. I think we'll have a more dynamic and a more focused legislature. And I've pledged that I would limit myself, if elected, to no more than 8 years. Ideally, I'd love to think that I'd be satisfied enough with what I could accomplish in 6 that I'd voluntarily leave. I will fight for a term limits bill. However, if I can't achieve it, I will not be one of those who talks about term limits and then forgets that I spoke about it and hopes everyone else did too. I'm going to hold myself to it. Member items. I have promised that if elected this year, I will not take member items in 2011, and I will not take them moving forward until our community our state is in an economic point where the idea of decentralizing tax dollars back into the communities makes sense. And if we reach that point, I also will not take member items in the current format, which is to say that the money that is our money, essentially the philosophy is we pay X number of dollars in tax into the state general fund. Well, we will send back, it's essentially a tax refund to the community, with the idea that then that money can be applied to some worthy causes, as it always is. I mean, most of the causes are worthy. The problem is that you have our legislator acting as king, handing out this money, often attaching their name to it whenever they can, to various organizations that deserve help. But why is one person making that decision? Why isn't the community making that decision? So I would prefer a system where you want to send us a tax refund back to our community? Great. Let's have a rotating board of community stakeholders from various sectors and have this be almost like a grant process where the community's deciding every year what deserves a shot in the arm this year, what's going to help this community the most. And it's not one person deciding, it's a group of people. And the legislator should be a voice in that process, just not the only voice. Maybe even lead that dialogue, but not totally control the dialogue. And secondly, the board should rotate so that no single person within the community can accumulate too much influence over the process, that it's truly a rotating process with interests shifting as the community shifts, and not creating a board of power holders over the rest of the community.
A follow-up to the member item topic, very interesting what you said, but another problem with member items, I think, based on different opinions that have been spoken about, is that it's not balanced. You have the majority party that gets, and I believe the Democrats said, well, we made it a little more fair, and I believe it was like a 2-to-1 ratio now, or something along those lines, where they got a certain amount, a certain fraction, and then the minority party, the Republicans, got the rest, the scraps, if you will. What are your thoughts on making a fair member item system where everyone gets the same amount? I know that you said you're not going to take any, but just the general system.
Right.
Do you believe?
Well, what I've said is I won't take any in 2011, and then we'd make a decision year by year based on the economic conditions moving forward. And like I said, would only accept them by changing the way that happens, and if that means me having to only organize that within our district, because that's not going to be able to be a statewide thing, then we're going to do that. One of the things people will see with me if I'm elected is that I'm not going to be unafraid to lead by example, even if there's not going to be anyone following, because I think we've seen enough of people talking, and then not acting, and then using the excuse, well, everyone else is doing it this way. That's not good enough. You have to be willing to stick your own neck out on occasion in order to give other people some courage to maybe do the right thing as well. I think there should be a more equitable distribution, and I would very much like to look into finding that right formula, and it does obviously need to be based on population and on economic conditions, as opposed to who's in charge. Now, fair enough, what they're doing right now, obviously it stinks, but that was done to the Democrats when the Republicans were in charge for many, many years, and so I think this is just where we're seeing, rather than the Democrats taking control of the legislature and then saying, okay, you know what, we're going to do the right thing, they're saying, well, you guys acted incorrectly for how many years, now we're going to give you a taste of your own medicine. I think that kind of childish mentality is a lot of what we've seen from this current leadership the last 2 years. If we look back on what happened in June of last year, which some people call a coup, I saw it as basically like a giant sandbox with a bunch of kindergartners who just all happened to be in their 50s and 60s, behaving completely unworthy of the trust that the people who live in their communities have put in them. If we look at the way the budget has gone the last 2 years, I just see, what I see is no progress towards where we need to get. I don't believe that any one party has the solution automatically. I think it's up to the individuals within whatever group is going to be leading to set those examples. I do happen to believe at this point in time the Republican Party is the party to bring more equity and balance to the state dialogue, just because of the way the party's composed. We have more representation throughout the state in the Senate, whereas the Democrat leadership, Democrat Party itself within the Senate is so heavily Hudson Valley, New York City area focused that we just can't have balance in the dialogue with that lack of representative balance throughout the state. So I truly believe that. I think that we need to achieve Republican majority in the state Senate moving forward, regardless of what happens in the other races. I think that to bring balance back to the dialogue, to bring more representation, particularly to upstate and central New York communities, we really need to have some turnover in these key upstate races. And obviously we're going to be fighting very hard all the way through until November 2nd to achieve that.